Hey guys, it's Brendan Borman back for another 270 video. If you like this video or any other videos on the channel, please like and subscribe to this channel for more 270 content. Today I'll be playing as Woodrow Wilson, taking on Taft, Eugene V. Debs, and Teddy Bull Moose Roosevelt. Thank you so much to Zach Algaze, to Dylan Hales, and Raymond Barroy for helping me recreate the 1912 U.S. presidential elections. My strategy in this game is going to be to go into New York, so I can either progress from town and gown into African American or town and gown into high tech, as I think all three of these guys will most likely lean national groups. Instead of my traditional commentary, I like to talk about the 1912 presidential election, and hopefully I can last in this game long enough to make it exciting. But the 1912 U.S. presidential election was held on Tuesday, November 5th, 1912. It included all of these candidates that are currently playing in this game. We have Woodrow Wilson, Howard Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, and we have Eugene Debs. Roosevelt served as president from 1901 to 1909 as a Republican, and Taft succeeded him with his support. However, Taft's actions as president displeased Roosevelt, and Roosevelt challenged Taft for the party nomination at the 1912 Republican National Convention. Taft, however, narrowly defeated Roosevelt. So Roosevelt, what he did was he rallied his progressive supporters and launched a third-party bid. At the Democratic Convention, Woodrow Wilson won the presidential nomination, defeating Speaker of the House Champ Clark and other candidates with the support of William Jennings Bryan and other progressive Democrats. The Socialist Party nominated Eugene V. Debs. The general election was bitterly contested by Wilson, Roosevelt, and Taft. Roosevelt's new nationalism platform called for social insurance programs, reductions to the 8-hour workday, and a robust federal regulation of the economy. Wilson's New Freedom platform called for tariff reduction, banking reform, and the new antitrust regulation. With little chance of victory, Taft conducted a subdued campaign on his platform of progressive conservatism. Debs claimed the three candidates were financed by trusts and tried to galvanize support behind his socialist policies. The Republican Party split. During Taft's administration, a rift developed between Roosevelt and Taft, and they became the leaders of the Republican Party's two wings: progressives, led by Roosevelt, and conservatives, led by Taft. Progressives favored labor restrictions protecting women and children, promoted conservatism, and were sympathetic toward labor unions. They also favored the popular election of federal and state judges over appointment by the president or the governors. Conservatives supported higher tariffs to encourage domestic production, but favored business leaders over labor unions and were generally opposed to the popular election of judges. Cracks in the party began to show when Taft supported the Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act in 1909. The act favored the industrial Northeast and angered the Northwest and South, where demand was strong for tariff reductions. Early in his term, President Taft had promised to stand for a lower tariff bill, but protectionism had been a major policy for the Republican Party since its founding. Taft also fought against Roosevelt's antitrust policy. While Roosevelt believed some monopolies should be preserved, Taft argued that all monopolies must be broken up. Taft also fired popular conservativist Gifford Pinchot as head of the Bureau of Forestry in 1910. By 1910, the split within the party was deep, and Roosevelt and Taft turned against one another despite their personal friendship. That summer, Roosevelt began a national speaking tour during which he outlined his progressive philosophy and the new nationalist platform, where he introduced in his speech in Kansas on August 31st. In 1910 midterm elections, the Republicans lost 57 seats in the House of Representatives, and as the Democrats gained a majority for the first time since 1894. These results were a large defeat for the conservative wing of the party. James Campbell writes that one cause may have been the large number of progressive voters choosing to vote third party over Republican conservatism. Nevertheless, Roosevelt continued to reject calls to run for president into the year 1911. In January, a newspaper editor, William White, wrote, "I do not think there is one chance in 1,000 that he will ever be wise enough to be nominated." However, speculation continued, further harming Roosevelt and Taft's relationship. After months of continuing support, Roosevelt changed his position, writing to the journalist that if nomination comes to me as a genuine public movement, of course I will accept. For the first time, many convention delegates were elected in presidential preference primaries. Progressive Republicans advocated primary elections as a way of breaking the control of political party by bosses. Altogether, 12 states had Republican primaries. Senator Fighting Bob Lafayette won 2 of the 4 primaries, North Dakota and his home state of Wisconsin. But Taft won a majority victory in Roosevelt's home state of New York and continued to rack up delegates in more conservative traditional state conventions. However, on March 28th, Roosevelt issued an ultimatum. If Republicans do not nominate him, he will run as an independent. Beginning with a runaway victory in Illinois, Roosevelt won 9 of the last 10 presidential primaries, including Taft's home state of Ohio, losing only one state, Massachusetts. Taft also had support from the bulk of the Southern Republican organizations. Delegates from the former Confederate states backed Taft by a 5-1 margin. These states had voted solidly Democratic in every presidential election since 1880. And Roosevelt objected that they were given 1/4 of the delegates when they would contribute nothing to the Republican Party. The Republican convention lasted from June 18th to June 22nd in Chicago. In the weeks leading up to the convention, many delegates remained uncommitted to a candidate. But Roosevelt accused Taft of stealing votes and attempted to have delegates from Arizona, California, Texas, and Washington, all states supporting Taft, removed from the convention. But he was unsuccessful. The delegates chose Taft to serve as the chairman, a move that signaled that Taft was likely to win the nomination. Roosevelt broke with tradition and attended the convention, where he was welcomed with great support from voters. Despite Roosevelt's premise in Chicago and his attempts to disqualify Taft's supporters, the incumbent ticket of Taft and James Sherman was renominated for the first ballot. Sherman was the first sitting vice presidential renominated since John Calhoun in 1828. After losing the vote, Roosevelt announced the formation of his new party dedicated to service all people. This would be later known as the Progressive Party. Roosevelt announced that his party would hold its convention in Chicago and he would accept nomination if offered. Meanwhile, Taft decided not to campaign before the election beyond his acceptance speech of August the 1st. The Democratic Convention was held in Baltimore from June 25th to July 2nd. Initially, the frontrunner was the Speaker of the House, Champ Clark of Missouri. Though Clark received the most initial votes, he was unable to get a 2/3 majority required to win the nomination. Clark's chances were hurt by Tammany Hall, the powerful New York City Democratic political machine, who threw its support behind him. The Tammany endorsement caused William Jennings Bryan, 3-time Democratic presidential candidate and the leader of the party's progressives, to turn against Clark. Bryan shifted his support to Woodrow Wilson and decried Clark as the candidate of Wall Street. Wilson had consistently finished second in balloting. Wilson had nearly given up hope and almost freed his delegates to vote for another candidate. Instead, Bryan's defection from Clark to Wilson led many other delegates to do the same. Wilson gradually gained steam, and Wilson finally received the nomination on the 46th ballot. Thomas Marshall, the governor of Indiana, had also swung Indiana's vote to Wilson and was named Wilson's vice presidential running mate. Progressives reconvened in Chicago and endorsed the formation of the National Progressive Party. The party was funded by publisher Frank Munsey and businessman George Walbridge Perkins, who served as an executive secretary. At their convention on August 5th, the party chose Roosevelt as its presidential nominee and Governor Hiram Johnson from California as the vice presidential running mate. The progressives promised to increase federal regulation and protect the welfare of ordinary people. At the convention, Perkins blocked an antitrust plank, shocking reformers who thought of Roosevelt as the true trust buster. The delegates of the convention sang the hymn "Onward, Christian Soldiers" as their anthem. In his acceptance speech, Roosevelt compared the coming presidential battle to the campaign in the Battle of Armageddon and stated that the progressives were going to battle for the Lord. Most progressive politicians remained in the Republican Party. The Socialist Party of America was highly functioned and was a coalition of local parties based on industrial cities and rooted in ethnic, especially German and Finnish communities, and some support in formalist populous rural areas and mining areas in the West, especially Oklahoma. By 1912, the party claimed more than thousands of locally elected officials in 33 states and 160 cities, especially in the Midwest. Eugene V. Debs had run for president in 1900, 1904, and 1908. Primarily to encourage the local effort, he did so again in 1912 with little challenge to his nomination. The party was divided into two main factions. The conservative faction, led by Congressman Victor Berger of Milwaukee, promoted pragmatic democratic reform, fought corruption, and opposed immigration as both a wage suppressant and drain on public resources. The radical faction sought to overthrow capitalism, tried to infiltrate labor unions, and sought to cooperate with the industrial workers of the world, IWW, or the Wobblies. It supported immigration to increase ranks for the war on capitalism. With few exceptions, the party had weak or non-existent links to local labor unions. Many of these issues had been debated upon the First National Congress of the Socialist Party in 1910 and again in 1912 at their convention in Indianapolis. At the convention, radicals won an early test by seating IWW leader Bill Haywood on the executive committee and passed a resolution favoring industrial unionism. Conservatives within the Socialist Party, they responded, refused to participate in the American elections, and organized the National Bureau of Health in the abolition of the Senate and the presidential veto. Debs did not attend. He saw his mission as keeping the two units together and hoped that someday they could work to achieve a common goal. The 1912 presidential election was bitterly contested. Roosevelt conducted a vigorous national campaign for the Progressive Party, denouncing the way of the Republican nomination that had been stolen from him. He bundled together his reforms under the rubric of the new nationalism and stumped the country for a strong federal role in regulating the economy and chasing bad corporations. Roosevelt rallied progressives with speeches denouncing their political establishment. He promised an expert Taft commission wholly removed from the possibility of political pressure or improper business influence. Wilson supported a policy called the New Freedom. This policy was based mostly on individualism instead of strong government. Through Wilson's rhetoric, paid homage to the traditional skepticism of government and collectivism in the Democratic Party, his election would embrace some of the progressive reforms that Teddy Roosevelt campaigned on. Attempted assassination of Teddy Roosevelt. At a campaign stop in Milwaukee on October 14th, John Schrank, a saloon keeper from New York, shot Roosevelt in the chest. The bullet penetrated his steel eyeglass case and a 50-page single-fold copy of his speech. It became lodged into Roosevelt's chest. Schrank was immediately disarmed and captured. He had been stalking Roosevelt. He was demented and said the ghost of President McKinley ordered him to kill Roosevelt to prevent a third term. Roosevelt shouted for Schrank to remain unharmed and assured the crowd he was going to be all right, then ordered police to take charge of Schrank and ensure no violence was done to him. Roosevelt, an experienced hunter, correctly concluded that since he was not coughing any blood, the bullet had not reached his lung. He declined suggestions to go to the hospital and instead delivered his scheduled speech with blood seeping into his shirt. His opening comments to the gathered crowd were, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know whether you fully understand that I'd just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He spoke for nearly 90 minutes before completing his speech and accepting medical attention. Afterwards, probes and an x-ray showed that the bullet had lodged into Roosevelt's chest muscle but did not penetrate. Doctors concluded that it would be less dangerous to leave it in place than to attempt to remove it. So, Roosevelt carried that bullet with him for the rest of his life. Taft was not campaigning and focused on his presidential duties. During that time, Wilson briefly suspended his campaign, but by October 17th, he was back on the campaign trail. He did avoid criticism of Roosevelt or his party. Roosevelt spent 2 weeks recuperating before returning to the campaign trail with a major speech on October 30th, designed to reassure his supporters he was strong enough for the presidency. However, on that same day, on October 30th, 1912, Vice Presidential James Sherman died, leaving Howard Taft without a running mate, less than a week before the election. Nicholas Butler, president of Columbia University, was hastily chosen to replace Sherman as the Republican vice presidential candidate. On November 5th, Wilson captured the presidency handily by carrying a record 40 states. As of 2021, this is the only presidential election since 1860 in which either four candidates received more than 5% of the vote, the popular vote, or a third-party candidate outperformed a Republican or Democrat in a general election. Wilson won the presidency with a lower percentage of the popular vote than any candidate since Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Taft's results remains the worst performance for any incumbent president, both in terms of electoral votes, 8, and share of popular vote, 23.17%. His 8 electoral votes remains the fewest by any Republican or Democrat, matched by Alf Landon's 1936 campaign. So that was my recap of the 1912 presidential election. As we check out the 270 match here, we are on turn number 13. If you made it this far, thank you so much for bearing with me. So this game has been frustrating to date. I did have a slight disadvantage with a candidate. I luckily have avoided pressure in New York to date, but I did just face some recent pressure from Eugene Debs. Instead of defending New York, I decided to flip Florida, which would give me 29 electoral votes. I used my African-American money, and even if it's just for a turn, I would flip the swing state bonus, which is $100,000, back into my column. Now, eventually, if I do lose New York, I will lose the high-tech bonus, but a lot of the high-tech states are already spoken for. Here's a ballot. So I have $110,000 of African American, $60,000 of Old South, $100,000 of swing state, $75,000 of counting gown, and $613 of cash, which is pretty good. Now I could do one of two things here. I could spend a ton of money, maybe defend New York. I could pressure some swing states like Ohio, Iowa. My Old South money likely will be no good in preventing Taft from flipping one or two states. What I might do is lock North Dakota, because if I can somehow eliminate Eugene Debs here, then that would be ideal, because Taft is ahead of him in EVs right now. But let's see what happens. Okay, so I did not get my turn in. I'm going to go ahead and skip 221 to 174. We did lose Old South, and high tech does go over to Eugene Debs. So with that, we fell just short of knocking him out. We do, fortunately for us, continue to have our swing state bonus. So let's go ahead and spin it up in Pennsylvania. Let's go ahead and spin it up in New Mexico. Maybe instead of going up in Pennsylvania, he's got that manufacturing money. Maybe I can go up in Iowa with my town and gown, and then maybe I could lock a state like a Colorado or a New Mexico. I'm not in New Mexico yet, so let me kind of play around with that. I've got $458 in cash. My AA money, that's going to be used to close off Florida or kind of defense in the Old South. So I don't think that he takes a chance here and leaves New York unoccupied. But I'm not in Ohio right now. He's got manufacturing locked. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and lock Colorado. And let's go ahead and save $431,000-ish. I'll spend in Hawaii to make sure that I'm there. And I'm going to roll over my AA money and my Old South money. We are close to a ballot. So there goes Eugene spreading out. And we did flip town and gown. So that will help us for this ballot round. So I do have $75,000 of town and gown. I'm going to lock New Mexico with my swing money. I could try to flip Ohio here. That would cost a lot of money if I'm wrong. So let's flip Minnesota. Defend some of these Old South states. So he's got export. I'm going to go ahead and lock Louisiana. It's got high tech. I'll go up a couple extra in Delaware. So that leaves me with $545,000. He's got the high tech money. I assume he'll go after Connecticut since it's a very good cost per EV, and I have not defended it in several turns. Let's go one more in Minnesota just in case. I think at this point I'm going to wave the white flag in Pennsylvania. I do think that he'll go after New Jersey. And if he gets New Jersey and Pennsylvania, that's 34, which puts me behind. So I have to get pretty fortunate. Maybe I can steal a South Dakota. So let's see here. Connecticut we defended, so we called that right. Georgia, Hawaii we flipped, that's 4. Could have maybe spent that money a little bit more efficiently, but I was able to flip Kentucky, so we're to 299. Okay, that's huge. Minnesota, Mississippi canceled that out though. Good defense in Nebraska. I hope that Mississippi play does not come back to haunt us. New Mexico has successfully closed out. Pennsylvania he's going to get, but only to the 4th pip, so he just spent his manufacturing money. Oof, Rhode Island. South Dakota defended. Yeah, we're in trouble here because I didn't go up in enough states. West Virginia and Wyoming we're going to get, but that's only going to be 266. So if we had successfully defended Mississippi, we would have won. Or just a flip of South Dakota there would have been a 269 tie. But good game to Eugene Debs, who is being played by Hard AI and Dylan Hales. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions for me, please leave those below in the video. Until next time, I'll catch you guys in the next 270 video.